distribution histogram. So now we have reached the point in our analysis. In the last lesson, we learned how to set up our risk analysis options and run a risk analysis based on the selected options. In this lesson, we will learn how to navigate and understand the distribution histogram. So now we have reached the point in our analysis where we can generate different reports and carry out some scenario modeling. If it is not already open, select File Open or File Open Recent to open the Register EPC Premitigated.plan file. Now, we must remember the purpose of risk modeling is to identify areas where the project could be going wrong. However, there is no point in only reporting on the bad points. We must come up with a plan to mitigate any potential problems. So the first chart that we're going to look at is the distribution histogram. So click on the Show Distribution icon in the top toolbar to open our previously saved distribution histogram. If you look at the top menus of the distribution histogram window, you will see that you have options such as export, copy, formatting, filtering, etc. And we will come back to some of them as we progress. On the left of our distribution histogram window, we will see all of our activities. If we click on any of the activities, we will see a histogram for that activity. Now, we want to look at our project completion milestone. So, highlight A011, Project Completion. Firstly, we must make sure that we understand the graph. There are two y-axes, and some people can find this to be confusing. The y-axis on the left is for the number of hits, and the one on the right is for the cumulative frequency. This simulation has had 1000 iterations. Now, if you look at the Tasks tab at the bottom left, you will see that the bar width is currently set automatically to a week. Let's change this to show the bar width as months. So now we'll have larger bars with each bar representing 1 month. Change the bar width back to weeks. Let's look at the tallest bar and trace it to see the number of hits. You will see that the bar has had 70 hits out of the 1000 iterations. Change the bar width to months and you'll note that the tallest bar has had approximately 280 hits out of 1000, and so on. So think of the bars as zones, and they will tell us how many hits ended up in each zone. Now at the bottom of the graph, you will see that there are different tabs for finish date, start date, duration, float, cost, etc. These tabs enable you to display your histogram in different ways, depending on the reporting requirements. We can also create histograms for resources. So click on the Histograms tab at the bottom left to view our resource histogram. So in the same way, we can look at costs or labor hours by highlighting the particular resource, say cost or labor. We read this histogram in the same way as the tasks histogram. Let's go back to our tasks histogram and set the bar width back to weeks. Each bar or zone will correspond to a certain number of hits, and the total of the hits will be 1000. Now let's look at the 80% level, or P80 level. What does this mean? The 80% confidence level means that 80% of my iterations would finish on or before that point. This is a very important point that we must remember, and we must be able to explain it to the project team. A very good way of viewing this is by adding a highlighter to our chart. We want to look at the delta between our deterministic date and our 80% mark. So what we're going to do is show our P80 contingency. Before we do that, let's have a look at how we can format highlighters to help us in our analysis. From the top menu, select Format Highlighters, and the Highlighters window will open. We can also open this window by simply right-clicking anywhere in the graph window and selecting Format Highlighters. You will see the currently defined highlighters or arrows. Click the Add button at the bottom and a new highlighters line will appear. By default, it will have a percentage of 50%. Click in the percentage field and change the value to 10%. Click OK to close the window and you will see the new 10% highlighter on the graph and in the bottom window. Deselect it in the bottom window and you will note that it is no longer displayed in the graph window. Select the checkbox again to display our new 10% highlighter. Now let's open the Format Highlighters window again by right-clicking the graph and selecting Format Highlighters. This time we are going to add some shading to our graph that will show us our P80 contingency. Click the Add button to add a new highlighter. Then, in the Type field from the pull-down menu, select Shade Between Values. Leave the Value 1 field as percentile. In the Percentage 1 field, enter 80%. Then change the Value 2 field to Deterministic from the drop-down menu. Let's give it a color, so click on the black color field and select a light color, say pale yellow. Now, under Description, name it as P80 Contingency. So, we will be shading the graph between the deterministic and 80% percentile. We will then see the delta between what I scheduled and what my 80% is telling me. Click OK to show our P80 contingency. So, the difference between what I scheduled and the 80% percentile is 113 days. Remember that everything in the shaded area to the left of the 80% point represents 80% of the iterations. We have an 80% chance of finishing on or before that date. So our 80% confidence date is 7th of May against our deterministic date of the 15th of January 2008. We only have a 2% chance of achieving that January date, and we will need an additional 113 days if we want to be 80% confident. Otherwise, we will need some mitigation strategies or even have to remove some scope. Now, we need to look at ways of mitigating this 113 days delta amount. So first, we should look at the inputs to see if any of them are wrong. If we cannot find anything wrong with our inputs, then we need to investigate ways of taking mitigating action. Before moving on, we should have a look at the information that we would like to display on the right of the distribution graph. Remember that too much information can be overwhelming and confusing for the project team. Right-click anywhere in the text window on the right-hand side and a small formatting window will pop up. Here we can format our statistics font, format our layout, copy statistics text to say Word or Excel, and copy the graph and statistics again to Word or Excel. Let's just click on Format Layout and a Format Layout window will open. On the left-hand side, if we deselect Show Task Free, no tasks will be displayed on the left of the graph window, so leave it selected. At the top, we can turn off the graph title if we want to. Then on the top right, we can show or not show our statistical data on the right of the graph window. Now, there are many statistical options that you could display, but I prefer to select the following because most people who look at our distribution graph will find the information to be meaningful. So, select Show Data, Show Iterations, Show Convergence. It's good to show the convergence so that we can confirm that the analysis converged within the number of iterations. Show minimum, show maximum, show mean, show bar width, and show highlighters. At the very bottom, we can elect to not show the controls on the distribution graph. Basically, this will hide the bottom part of the distribution graph window. Click OK to close the Format Layout window. Now, if we right-click anywhere in the graph window, a slightly extended list of options will open. The additional options will include Format Graph, Format Axes, Format Highlighters, we discussed this earlier, Export Graph Data, this exports the data as a CSV file, and lastly, Advanced Graph Settings. Click this option to open the plot window. Here you will find many settings for changing the look of your graph, and I recommend that you experiment with the settings if you wish to. Close the plot window. Let's look at the highlighters control at the bottom left of the graph window. You will see that all of the highlighters that we have defined in the Format Highlighters window will be displayed here. In this box, we can deselect any of the highlighters on our graph. At the top of this box, there is a highlighter called Selected with a percent value. So let's select 70% on our histogram, and you will see that the highlighters box tells us that we have selected 70%. Deselect it to turn this value off, and it will no longer be visible in the graph window. Now in the bottom right-hand corner of the graph window, there are two buttons for Add to Distribution Analyzer and Show Distribution Analyzer. These controls are also available from the top graph menu by clicking Tools, Show, or Add to Distribution Analyzer. So as a quick example, let's select A130 Risk 4 and add it to the Distribution Analyzer. Let's select a second activity, A130 Risk 9, and again add it to the Distribution Analyzer. Then click Show Distribution Analyzer. Here you will see that the selected information is now displayed as S-curves side by side, and this is where we can start to run scenarios to mitigate any negative information that we have identified. Click Cancel to close the Distribution Analyzer window. Then click OK to save and exit the Distribution Graph window. So in this lesson, we learned how to navigate and understand the distribution histogram.